Hello, and welcome to the ILTV News Podcast. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor at ILTV News, and I welcome you back, our viewers and our listeners. Today I have with me Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. Thank you so much for being here.
Maayan, thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, of course. It's so much fun to be able to see you back again in Israel. It's been a little while. Now, I want to start with something that is actually quite timely, and there is an issue that has been going on in the news that probably is very close to your heart, and that is access to Israel for evangelical Christians, Christians who love Israel, support Israel. I don't know if you know that much about what's going on, but there's been an exchange of letters between U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and our Interior Minister, Moshe Arbel, over the fact that some Christian Zionists are struggling to get work and other visas into the country. First of all, has that ever happened to you?
No, actually, Maayan, this just, I've been so busy on this trip here with doing interviews. I heard, I got wind of what was going on, but I don't really know the full story behind it. First, I will say that I know Ambassador Huckabee is probably watching this closely and is going to make sure that everything gets taken care of. But I've never had a problem coming here. I've never been rejected for anything. In fact, I'm always welcomed here. So, no, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so that's really good news to hear. What I'm understanding is also maybe is less the tourist visas, more the Christians who want to work here for longer periods of time. Why do you think, though, that it was necessary, if you do, to leak these letters and to get it out into the open? Huckabee sort of threatening that maybe Israelis won't have access to the U.S. Seems like it's creating some daylight between Israel and the U.S. here. Do you feel that that's the case, or do you think that that's just, media doing its thing?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. But, honestly, if you think about it, again, I'm not really sure the concern why there's a delay, but if it has anything to do with the history of Christianity, with Israel and with the Jewish people, I can understand why there would be great concern. And I feel like when I come here, I'm coming home, and it feels I'm always welcomed. It's not an issue that I've seen, so I'm not sure where the problem is coming from. But again, I think Ambassador Huckabee is probably going to make sure, I know he will, make sure everything is taken care of.
And you mentioned the history of Christians, and one of the concerns I think that has come up is this idea that if Christians stay here long term, there could be an issue of proselytizing or trying to convert Jews to Christianity. How familiar are you with that sentiment? Do you feel like that's actually happening in Israel?
I know that happens. And I guess my statement to that would be, we have to remember we're being invited to come into another country. And Israel is a Jewish country. And I think Christians come over here with the intention of trying to convert. But would we do that? If somebody invited us into their home for dinner, would we tell them how to prepare the meal and how to set things up or how things should be done? No, we would be grateful and respectful. And I think that needs to be considered with whatever is going on. But like I said, I always feel very welcomed here when I come, and I've never had an issue. Not when I come through customs, but I always get the welcome back.
That's awesome.
It's a blessing. It inspires me. So I hope whatever the situation is, it's going to be ironed out, and that everybody is able to come in and out so they can do their work. Because really what is important is we've got to get Israel's message out to the world, especially to this evangelical Christian community, the Christian community as a whole.
How many evangelical Christians are there in the United States?
They're saying 80 million.
Wow.
So the number is growing, which is good because the evangelical Christians read their Bible, and this is important, especially when it comes to telling Israel's story, telling it from a biblical perspective and not from, traditional mainstream denomination, which too often is what causes people to go in the wrong direction. They don't look at the Bible from a Jewish perspective. They look at it from their Christian perspective. And as you know, our mission is to try to get Christians to understand that biblical responsibility, that biblical foundation as to why we stand with Israel and the Jewish people.
For sure. And that's certainly the reason that Christians have been coming here actually in really high numbers since October 7th, and certainly opening their pocketbooks and giving to Israel, supporting them through prayer and other, in other ways since the start of this, the massacre and the ongoing war. And I think we've seen that even more in the last 21 months than, with all the support that we've seen over the years. This period has really proved that Christians do stand with Israel.
Yeah, one of the amazing things that I've seen, because we were watching real time the rockets and the missiles coming in, the barrage and buildings being blown up. And it was really, I know from our people, our followers, we were hearing from them about their concern and what can they do. And it was overwhelming because we felt like, what can we do? What more can we do? Here we're watching Israelis being attacked, and we just felt helpless. So I encourage people, as soon as you can donate to different organizations to help, pray, obviously, continue to pray, and then go on social media and fight this battle. Tell people, you people, most of our followers, they're biblically articulate, and they know. They're, I should say, biblically literate, so they know. And so we're also seeing this dynamic within the United States of America of talk show hosts who are communicating a message that is not biblical, that is accusatory, stating we shouldn't be helping Israel like we're doing. And so we've got this whole isolationist group of people who are trying to make it look like we shouldn't be helping Israel.
And it's actually really interesting what you're bringing up, and something I wanted to ask you about, because you've actually been pretty vocal against this crowd. And I want to move over to MAGA, right, which is this group within the Trump administration, the Make America Great Again Chevra, we'll call it, right? And you've been pretty harsh against them, warning that if they don't support Israel and if they come out against Israel, against the biblical mandate, that they will actually receive some kind of judgment. And that's a pretty serious claim. I mean, explain to me what's going on.
Well, we know the scriptures, Genesis 12:3. God said, I will bless those who bless you, Abraham, and I will curse those who curse you. Now, he's also talking about Abraham's descendants. And the next verse, if it were to be translated from the English to the Hebrew, and he who ignores you, Israel, I will utterly destroy. So these people are bringing a curse upon their own head, but they're also subjecting our country to the curse because they are failing to present the biblical message, the biblical story, the biblical reason as to why we stand with Israel. I mean, it's those Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon, the values of George Washington. And when he received a letter from the Toro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, and they asked him after the American Revolution was fought, how are Jews going to fare? Because we don't do very well in history when there's a revolution. And Washington went to them and he told them, you too will sit under your own vine tree. He quoted from the book of Micah. This is our first president. He quoted from the book of Micah, you'll sit under your own vine tree. You will know peace. He would be rolling in his grave right now to watch what's happening in the United States of America, teaching Americans, because Americans don't know this. And these people that are spewing these lies and disinformation, they have no idea. Haim Solomon, who was a Sephardic Polish Jew, wealthy banker, bankrolled the American Revolution for George Washington. We wouldn't be a country without him. So these are stories, and it's why what we do at PJTN, especially with our education, because we see that our children are being indoctrinated with the propaganda that we see on mainstream media, and even supposedly amongst conservative circles. But we're not teaching our children this history, and it's important that we do teach this to our kids. It's why, Governor DeSantis, thank God, has reformed we've seen education reform in the state of Florida, 1.8 million kids every year are going to be learning about this history, learning about the early founders who came over and founded this country. The fact that originally Hebrew was supposed to be the original language of the United States of America. I wish they would have gone through with it so that we would be speaking Hebrew right now on
Well,
this
that certainly
interview.
would be good for my kids who, like, I have to say, speak English, because I want them to be able to be part of the world,
Exactly.
And my youngest ones always say, no, I can speak Hebrew because everyone speaks Hebrew. I'm like, no, only in Israel, nowhere else. But that would have been very helpful.
Right, but the seal of the Harvard seal. The early founders saw themselves as Israelites, modern day Israelites at the time, and they were coming to the United States to flee the tyranny of the king. So, these things, unfortunately, are not told. I mean, I didn't even learn these things in school. It took me and my research now to say, wait a minute. America could have been a Hebrew nation, a Hebrew-speaking country.
Wild.
And how did we miss that? But I think these are all important things to teach because there is a rise of anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, we are seeing anti-Semitism in the Christian church. We see it among these individuals like Tucker Carlson, these thought leaders who have a huge following. 7 million people are following him. I think they say Candace Owens.
Yeah.
These people pose a threat because they don't know their history. Why don't they know their history? They can do the research just like we do when we research for any of our films or television shows. Why don't they research?
Well, my assumption is that people live on sound bites today, so they don't really have the depth or feel that they need the kind of depth potentially, or maybe they are really anti-Semitic. I mean, tell me, why do you think in general conservatives, for the last decades, people in Israel at least have felt that they're really close allies, and you are seeing kind of a divide even in the White House. Tucker Carlson certainly has the ear of President Trump just as much as Huckabee. So why is this happening, and what do we do about it?
I think the reason that it's happening is because we've allowed people, influencers, to come in and influence the president. And fortunately for President Trump, he is, we put out a statement, I don't know if you saw, about Tucker Carlson, that he didn't belong in the White House because his views, his values do not reflect that of the administration. And of course that when we put out that statement, the statement went viral. It went all over the globe, and calling him out. And Tucker called me a couple days after this hit, and he said, "Why?" Because I had called him an anti-Semite. He said, "Why would you say that to me?" And I said, "Look at the interviews you do." And I named a couple of them. One when he was doing an interview with Piers Morgan, and they were talking about what was happening in Gaza, and he accused Gaza, of killing Christians, IDF, of killing Christians in Gaza. Well, I said to him, Tucker, you know better than that. I said, how the MO of Hamas, they put women and children and Christians out on the front line for collateral damage. Why would you say something like that? I said to him, you have violated the 9th commandment by bearing false witness against your brother. And then, there was the interview that he did with Munther Isaac, a priest or pastor from the Bible Bethlehem College. And I said to him, he said that Israel is occupying Palestinian land. I said, Tucker, you've read your Bible. God didn't give that land to the Palestinians. He gave it to Israel. And so, the problem with people like Tucker, and Tucker did that interview with Ted Cruz and condemned Ted Cruz that he didn't know where Genesis 12:3 was, that scripture in the Bible. Well, neither did Tucker. Until he was speaking to me, because I brought that up to him. So, people like him, Candace Owens, who have an impact, I don't know why they're doing. To me, it seems quite sinister, because they're not basing what they're doing based on their faith. But they say that we're Christians, and they to try to convince their audience they're legitimate. They have a legitimate understanding of what is happening, what's going on. But it's frightening to see what they're doing in the name of their religion.
It is frightening. I mean, what do you think could be the repercussions? It does seem very dangerous. You know, Israel, you mentioned there's 80 million, right, evangelicals in the United States. We really count on evangelical support in some capacity to support the state of Israel. Younger evangelicals, by all studies, are starting to disconnect not only from Israel, but from their Bible and then from Israel as a result of that. You're seeing this younger generation, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, kind of hijacking Christianity, taking it in another direction. What could that mean in 10 years?
It could be frightening in 10 years. We would have a generation that would not stand with Israel and the Jewish people. And it's why, again, what we're doing at PJTN is to make sure that we're educating Christians about our biblical duty, not from what is politically expedient. This is not an issue. You know, everybody says we shouldn't be helping Israel in this war, isolationism, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? I get it. I don't want to be fighting in Ukraine and in Russia. But when it comes to Israel, you better believe we better be there to stand with Israel, because judgment will come to us. The book of Obadiah, God told the prophet in the last days he was going to wipe out the descendants of Edom because they stood by while their brother Jacob, Israel, was held in captivity and they did nothing. God forbid the United States of America, a Judeo-Christian nation, not stand up to defend Israel. We are part and parcel. We are joined at the hip. It is our faith, our Judeo-Christian faith, that unites us. And that's why we stand with Israel. I get it about the others, but when it comes to Israel, when Israel comes knocking or picks up the phone and calls us, we better answer.
It's a very powerful statement. Now, you know, you've spoken a lot about, I want to get into more of what PJTN does. And one of the things that I want to talk about first is this whole concept of education. And with the idea of education, you've actually been calling out Qatar for a number of years as being, you know, kind of infiltrating into our educational system. We've certainly seen that carry out on the college campuses. We're starting to get more and more information about how Qatar has sort of, you know, put its tentacles even here in Israel in terms of its impact on many, many echelons, and likely eventually it will come out its true impact on the reason that we didn't stop or we were able to catch October 7th. But I want to talk to you about its influence on the U.S. people, on the educational system in the United States. What is it doing? How do you know? And, you know, what's the impact?
Well, back in 2012, we had a parent come to us in Williamson County, belt buckled the Bible Belt. That's where we're headquartered. PJTN is headquartered. She said, "You'll never believe what we're teaching our kids in Williamson County schools." And I said, "Come over, bring me the book." She brought me the textbook. There was a quote that legitimized Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant, Sbarro Pizzeria, because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions. So I said to the mother, I said, "Tell me more. What happened?" She said, "My son came home from school and he asked me who has legitimate rights to the land of Israel." She said, "What does the Bible say?" This is another evangelical family. They know their Bible. He was homeschooled through middle school, and this was his first year in high school. And it was only 3 months. He'd only been in school 3 months, and he came home questioning his faith, questioning what he knew about the Bible. And his mom said to him, "Well, what does the Bible say?" And he says to his mom, "I know what the Bible says, but tell me the truth. Who has legitimate rights to the land?"
Oh, wow.
And she said, "Oh, my gosh." So she brought me the book. This incident actually occurred on November 29th that year.
Okay.
We know what November 29th is, Nakba Day. And the teacher decided she was going to do a lesson on the Middle East. And she brings in a guy who's supposedly an Arab, who supposedly is an expert on the Middle East. And he was qualified because he'd been there 11 times. Well, I've been there 20. So I've got a little bit more qualification. But anyhow, she brought me the materials. I looked through the book. I said, "Leave me the book." I went from cover to cover. Not only was there anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist content, but there was anti-American and anti-Judeo-Christian, the values that our country was founded upon. So I told the mother, I said, "We're going to go through the process. We're going to get rid of this book." And what ended up happening, we brought it to the attention. We went to meet with the teacher, to the principal of the school, to the superintendent of schools. We asked, okay, we want to get rid of this textbook. This is full of lies and disinformation. And the superintendent said, well, we're going to put together a panel, and they're going to review the textbook, and then we'll get back to you. Well, that was about a month later. The school board was going to be meeting, and they were going to vote that night. I had no idea. They did not tell me how they were going to vote. They just said, we'll vote that night. And so I knew I had to get people to show up at the school board meeting to make sure that they communicated their distaste for this book, which was a Pearson-published textbook. I just want to say that. Pearson Publishers, don't forget that name, because that's where the propaganda, it's not just them, but Pearson is the biggest. But anyhow, that night that the school board was meeting, I was sitting there waiting. I didn't know who was going to show up. We launched a media campaign to make people aware of what was going on. Well, before the meeting started, the room was packed, standing room only. People signed up to speak, and they communicated they want the textbook out. It doesn't reflect the community's values. And I got up and I said, this is an election year. If you don't get rid of this textbook, we're getting rid of all of you.
Oh, wow.
And guess what? In 4 months, actually, we had 4 months to flip that school board, and we did. All 6 school board members that were up for re-election were removed. It was amazing to see. But that's what just one person, if that mom had not come and showed me what the content that was in that textbook, I wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have been able to even deal with this issue, and more generations would be taught from that textbook.
Don't you think most parents don't know what's in their kids' textbooks? I mean, my kids are in school. I'm not reading their textbooks.
Yeah, I know. And you know something? We have to. Because even in the private schools, even the private Jewish and Christian day schools, we're finding the propaganda as well. This is very dangerous because it's going on globally. And these, like Pearson Publishers, is a global textbook publishing company. So their tentacles go into all the Western states.
And what role is Qatar playing in all of this?
So Qatar, in 2012, when we were doing the research, the funders of this propaganda, these textbooks, Pearson published textbooks, were Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Libya.
Why are they funding American textbooks?
Well, you would think they're not even, Pearson is not even a U.S.-based textbook publishing company. They're British-based. So what are we doing with British-based textbooks in our U.S.-based schools? We actually, in the United States, we need somebody to invest in a new publishing house to publish accurate information for history, civics, and social studies. But no, today it's flipped because now Qatar, with all of its wealth, is the major investor, Qatar and the CCP. Qatar spends $1.6 billion on K through 12 education.
In the United States alone.
In the United States. We wonder why our kids are marching in pro-Hamas rallies with terrorists. Oh my gosh, it's because of what we've been indoctrinating our kids with. So we're teaching our kids we need to stand up for what is right and we need to be vocal. So our kids see this whole conflict that's going on, and because they've already been indoctrinated, they see Israel as the bad guy, and poor Hamas and the Gazans, and now poor Iran.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
It's unbelievable. You think about, though, how long this could take to rectify, because here in Israel we talk a lot about if we were able to, reform the Palestinian Authority and, help to reduce terror in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza, but it takes generations to re-educate because you'd have to redo all the schooling.
That's right.
So is that kind of where we're at in the United States?
That's the same thing that we're seeing in America. We have lost 3 generations. What we have to do is we have to go back to re-teach our kids truth. And that's why, President Trump has stated recently that he's going to dismantle the Federal Department of Education.
Right.
Fantastic. Bring it back to the states. Governor DeSantis he's presented or provided the gold standard when it comes to education. Back when he was then congressman, I brought him these books and I showed him. These textbooks pose, and as far as I'm concerned, the greatest national security threat to the United States of America. Because if we don't teach our kids about our history, they will turn on us. They will believe the lies and the disinformation that they're being taught in the classrooms today. But Governor DeSantis, when he saw the content, he told me, he said, I'm running for governor. If I get elected, we're getting rid of the textbooks. We're getting rid of Common Core. And sure enough, Maayan, he got elected. And the first meeting press conference that he had, he made the announcement in a school. He said, I'm getting rid of textbooks and we're getting rid of Common Core because somebody brought the textbooks to me and showed me what was in the textbook.
Are there any other states that have followed suit?
The state of Tennessee has followed suit. We're working on getting the funding in place so that we can go in and do more states like the other red states, like Texas, like Ohio, like Arizona. So we're making improvement. People are beginning to realize there is a huge problem. I think the shocker for most Americans when we saw our young people on our college campuses. See, everybody thinks that the college campus is what initiated what happened in K through 12 education. No. We've been, for 3 generations, we have been priming the pump so that when this generation comes up and they go to the university, when they, hear people chanting, we've got to, let's get involved in a cause, they buy into this cause because they've already taught, well, Israel is the problem.
So with Qatar, just jumping back to that for a moment, with all the money they're investing in this and how much they've really infiltrated, the U.S. has one of its most major army bases sitting in Qatar. Yeah. It seems that the U.S., I'm also a U.S. citizen as much as an Israeli citizen, and the U.S. is really in bed with Qatar. Even though we know that Qatar funds Hamas, funds terrorists, in fact, houses them in the country, and probably paid and knew everything about October 7th before it happened, we still count on them to negotiate for the hostages. We somehow give them respect and allow them to have the ear of the top echelon in the White House.
Right.
Do you think we should leave our military base there? Is that even safe for the United States?
When I heard how involved Qatar was, it caused me to question what is going on. Because does Trump really understand? We know he gets it. We know that they're negotiating. This is Hamas. Look at Iran. And you have to ask yourself, is this an accident? Why would we support someone like Qatar when they are funding terrorists? We're America. We don't negotiate with terrorists. So this is a huge concern for a lot of us. We're scratching our heads saying, this doesn't line up. Why is this happening? Because these people have been working to undermine, just like President Trump has penalized Harvard University and I think he's withheld $850 million from the university because they won't address the anti-Semitism problem on their campus. Well, we're funding the people that are helping organize those rallies on the campus. So, why is this happening? This is the big, huge question that many of us have. We love President Trump. We're grateful for what he's doing in standing with Israel and sending the B-2 bomber over there. Yes, that's America. We've got Israel's back, just like those T-shirts that we see at the T-shirt shops. Israel, we got your back. Yeah. And Israel, of course, that has theirs in reverse. America, we got your back. And literally, that was the beauty of what we saw with that. But back to the whole issue of Qatar. Why do we give them so much prominence when they are actually working to destroy and undermine us? What I think, Maayan, needs to happen, Trump needs to ask the Prime Minister of Qatar, can we look at your textbooks? In fact, I have a team that is based out of Orlando that would love to get hold of your textbooks and review them. That's what needs to happen. We need to see what are the Qataris teaching their children. We know what the Palestinians are being fed. What about the Iranians? We say we want to have this relationship and we want to negotiate and work together and help each other's economy. But how do you do that when you're teaching other kids from other countries, these countries you want to work with, to hate America, to hate Israel? Can you really, are you going to be able to put together a sustaining program where we can actually work together and we're going to change, the culture? We're going to actually listen to one another and we're going to love each other and we're not going to try to kill each other?
Can't
What a
do that.
concept.
Right, and it certainly always starts with the kids. Now, we're going to run out of time, and I just want, in 30 seconds to give some final sentiments. We've talked about a lot of things that are very challenging today.
Right.
But is there anything in just a sentence or two that gives you hope when you look at the situation going on in the U.S., Israel, the relations between the countries?
The one thing that gives me hope is that more and more people are turning to their faith, especially in the United States. People are looking at what's happening. They're beginning to question. They're looking at what happened with Israel. Especially Christians are starting to connect the dots and realize we really are living in the last days. And if we are living in the last days, then what is required of me? Because I was put here on this planet, just like you were. We were all brought here for such a time as this. We didn't come into the world 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. God brought us into the world now to impact our culture, our society, our countries. And that's what gives me hope, that there are even young people who are starting to go back. They're leaving the institutional, mainline churches and moving back toward a more orthodox. They're looking for something solid. They're looking for something historic. They're looking for their foundation. Where did they come from? And so we see a movement toward the Greek Orthodox or the Christian Orthodox movement. I think that, to me, is the most encouraging trend, is that people are they're listening to the talking heads on the shows, but they're looking for something deeper and true. And that truth can only be found in the Bible. And that's what I encourage our followers, our supporters. You've got to study your Bible. You have to know what was the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how are you impacted by that? Because even in the New Testament scriptures, you're brought into the commonwealth of Israel because of your faith. So if you are brought in and part of the commonwealth of Israel, what is your responsibility to Israel? What is your responsibility to Jacob and his descendants?
Yeah.
That's what gives me hope, is people are returning back to their faith. It's a holy time.
Oh, I'd love to end on that note. A holy time for such a time as this.
Amen.
Laurie Cardoza-Moore, thank you so much for joining today.
Maayan, thank you for having me.